Well, good morning, guests as well as parishioners of St. Joseph Parish. My name is Dave Retzik, the Director of Faith Formation. And again, we welcome you to the Universal Us in Action. Together for the next 2 hours, we're going to delve more deeply into the letter that Pope Francis recently brought out this year, Fratelli Tutti, as well as understand what he's talking about and calling us and how to live in brother and sisterhood in our church by looking at an example of his own life as a pastor at a parish in Argentina. To begin our opening of this presentation, we will begin with prayer as we do with all things at St. Joseph. And so at this time, I'm going to bring up the opening prayer and invite our pastor, Father John Trout, to lead it with us. Father Trout.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dave. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this presentation. And a welcome especially to my good friends, Bob and Paul. This prayer was given, as you can see, at Tomb of St. Francis of Assisi on October 3rd, on the vigil of the Feast of the Saint, on the 8th year of his pontificate. And it was launched with Fratelli Tutti. That's where he initiated the whole presentation on Fratelli Tutti. So we'll begin with a prayer to the Creator. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Lord, Father of our human family, you created all human beings equal in dignity. Pour forth into our hearts a fraternal spirit and inspire in us a dream of renewed encounter, dialogue, justice, and peace. Move us to create healthier societies and a more dignified world, a world without hunger, poverty, violence, and war. May our hearts be open to all the peoples and nations of the earth. May we recognize the goodness and beauty that you have sown in each of us, and thus forge bonds of unity, common projects, and shared dreams. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you, Father Trout. And at this point, we'd like to welcome both again our presenters, Professor Robert O'Gorman from Loyola University and the Institute of Pastoral Studies, and Professor Paul Dukecki. Both, I should say, are Professor Emeritus of the universities. Professor Dukecki from the Department of Human and Organizational Development in Vanderbilt Peabody College, and Professor O'Gorman from, again, the Institute of Pastoral Studies at Loyola University here in Chicago. Professor Dukecki is going to begin our presentation on the Universal Us. I'm bringing up his PowerPoint presentation. Professor Dukecki.
Thank you. Let's go to next. This begins as a kind of a overview or a recap of where you had been with us if you had been in the last presentation several months ago, which I had not been in. And I was really sorry to have missed that. I watched it on tape, and it went the way I hoped it would go. And Bob O'Gorman was a terrific stand-in for me. So we're going to begin with a kind of a recap and further look at Fratelli Tutti. Here, this is just a little collage here of there's the middle is the cover of one of the book presentations, Fratelli Tutti on Fraternity and Social Friendship. Pope Francis, when he came up with the title, a bunch of people on this planet got very unhappy with Fratelli, because that's brothers and we're sisters. Indeed, as you read it, it is almost always brothers and sisters, and I've been told that Fratelli has it within it has the idea of sisterhood as well. So let's let the let's let Francis off the hook on that one anyway. And then just a few statements from the encyclical upper left. We have him right there at the tomb of Saint Francis signing the encyclical. The Saint Francis is his stamp is all over the what we will see, and he thought it was important to remind us all about the life, about the existence of Saint Francis, and invite us to understand more. And then he picks up and moves to elaborate much of that. And then there are various, oh, by the way, in fact, I meant to ask you this, David. I assume we can send copies of the PowerPoint to anyone who would request a copy.
Yes, sir, we can do that.
Good. So don't worry about missing notes or whatever, assuming that there's something worth taking a note of. But you can all get a copy of it if you just send for it. So here are various aspects of his take on this, his overview of this encyclical, and then let's just look at the bottom one. He's pointing us off the slide and into the world and into action, and saying, once this health crisis passes, our worst response would be to plunge even more deeply into feverish consumerism and new forms of egotistic self-preservation. So he is up to date. He's talking about many things, including the COVID-19, and basically saying to the church, we've stopped being our usual selves when we've finally mastered this beast called COVID-19. Let's not just come back to where we were. That would be a disaster. We must move forward. And so the encyclical is really about moving forward in our thinking. And toward the end, I'm going to tell you about a new book, perhaps some of you are aware of, called Let Us Dream, which is like the other side of the coin of Fratelli Tutti. Let Us Dream is a little bit more action-oriented. Next, please. Now, the one before. There we go.
That's the one we just did, sir?
No, the one that says recap. That's
this is it. Yes.
Yeah. These were titles and aspects of the prior presentation, and I just want to make a few comments here. One, right in the middle is the most important thing he's talking about, namely relationality, relationality. This is the core of human existence. It's the core of our relationship to God. It is, in fact, our God. Our God is relational, the Trinity. And he's saying that he's calling us all into a certain type of relationality, and that relationality is called fraternity. And we're going to follow through with the example of Saint Francis, and deal with issues of community, and try to participate in a culture of encounter, and then a very, very important dimension of this, the need for and power of dialogue, because dialogue is possibly the most powerful tool in order to enable us to move forward along the lines of universal fraternity. And then finally, for reform of the church, and that's really what we didn't talk that much about last time, but will this time. Next, please.
Hey, Paul.
Yes.
Could you adjust your screen slightly? We're only getting the bottom part of your face.
I'm not getting any of my face, so I don't know how to adjust it.
Just push away the screen a little bit,
Yeah,
a little bit more.
Dave, could you put me in that box?
I can't move you. You have to adjust the screen on yourselves, Professor, or so. I'm seeing more of you or so.
Well, then you tell me where to move it,
Keep going. Push it a bit more.
because I'm seeing again you and I'm not seeing me. How's that?
That's better.
That's better. Yeah,
Better, best, worst, worst?
much better.
Much better. Thank you,
Okay.
Professor.
All right. I wouldn't want to cut off half of my, my assets here. So Francis is a reformer, and where is he leading us through these reforms? And Bob Newbro and I have been studying Francis in some detail for
Pablo Gorman.
Oh
Gotcha.
my gosh! I just named our deceased colleague who was working with
The
us.
third member of the Trinity, right?
The third, the Bobs, Paul,
Yeah.
Robert, and Bob Newbro. Bob O'Gorman, that's him right down there. Not Bob Newbro. And anyway, we've been studying Francis, and we have, along with others, agreed that the major themes, the overarching themes in reform for Francis are mercy, the preferential option for the poor, and synodality. Now, the idea here is that if we are a church all the way from the Vatican down to parishes and the church in the home, who are pursuing the kingdom of God and kingdom communities, which is a great choice of name for you folks, pursuing the reign of God, pursuing God's community, 3 ways of saying the same thing. And we're pursuing something that is already and not yet here. This is a kind of the dialectic of the already and not yet that the liberation theologians talk about. And so that's what our Pope here, pointing us to the future, is talking about. And where the summary of where he wants us to go is that multifaceted colored marble right there at the end. Next. And there is this elaboration of this. Francis uses the metaphor of polyhedron as much as anything. That is a copy of, that's an example of a polyhedron. That's a unity. It all comes together in the unity of this polyhedron. But when you look at it inside and so on, there are many facets, many different facets. So bringing differences together in unity is Francis' vision. This is his overarching vision as the Pope of a world church, of a cosmic church for that matter. There's all kinds of different aspects and phenomena and so on out there, and they are not always together. In fact, maybe there will always be some that aren't together, but his goal is to bring them all together. And the idea that will bring them together is fraternity. Okay, and this just elaborates things a little further here. And if you want to talk about what are the dimensions of his thinking, they are mercy on the top, synodality, and the poor. And mercy would be the heart. And we recall that the first thing he did was, when he became Pope, was to have a year of mercy. And I'll come to mercy in a second because I think it's really important. And then if one understands that one is trying to have this universal mercy, then we come together in synodality, or the head, if you will, or multiple heads, to make decisions about what it would mean, what we need to do in order to bring about this mercy. And the doing, the hands part, is the preferential option for the poor. And at the bottom is just a general observation of the fact that this really comes out of the understanding of our God as a Trinity. So the Trinity, who are three persons in one God, really is unity and diversity. God, unity, three persons, diversity. Okay, next, please. Just very briefly to talk about these three. Mercy. On the right, left was the logo for the Year of Mercy. Merciful like the Father. So what we're starting is saying, God the Father is merciful, and therefore it's got to have implications for all of us. Okay, and Francis wrote a book called "The Name of God is Mercy." Next, please. Francis' favorite theologian is Walter Casper. And Casper has a book on, as you'll see in the reference below, Mercy, the Essence of the Gospel and the Key to Christian Life. And he develops a very simple but unbelievably impactful idea. Namely, the mercy of God is his loving concern for each one of us. God's loving concern. Well, what else is God if not love? God is love. But putting it in the context of mercy, mercy is God's loving concern for each one of us. And then the logic goes, as the Father loves us, so do his children. Just as he is merciful, so we are called to be merciful to each other. And on the bottom, we have this little diagram that God shows mercy to us, and we are, in turn, ought to show mercy to each other. Okay, next, please. Then preferential option for the poor, which is a large, complicated, demanding, challenging topic. And we don't, I'm not going to take much time on this at all. You've all thought of it, I'm sure, in one way or another. The idea, and Francis's thinking and doing here, are we must respond to the whole person, those persons who are at the periphery or the poor, and in terms of labeling a social problem, the social problem of our time, perhaps of any time, says Francis, inequality is the root of social ills. And right now, the globe, the world, exists in a state in various facets of inequality, worse than ever in its history. Next, please. And then what we need to do is to get together as a people in synodality. Next, please. And just briefly, the word synod is derived from syn, hodos, sin with, hodos, way or journey. So synodality is together on a journey. And then Francis translates this as laity, pastors, bishops, Pope as well, walking together. In other words, all of us walking together would be the ideal way of implementing synodality. And there's going to be, interestingly enough, a synod on synodality. I believe it's next year, or is it this year? Well, anyway, it's coming up, and it's going to be a very important one. Next, please. Now to talk a little bit, to begin our discussion of Francis the Great Reformer. And although he doesn't label chapters or aspects of the encyclical or of the book as, all right, let's do this to reform the church, nonetheless, there are things that are there just all over both the encyclical and the book, Let Us Dream, that are rich with implications for reform of the church. But in general, in thinking about the form of the church, he says, and this is what, repeating that from the first collage, anyone who thinks that the only lesson to be learned from the pandemic was the need to improve what we already are doing or refine existing systems and regulations is denying reality. I think that's a pretty strong statement, and we ought to keep it in mind. And when we come out of this madness we're living in, we should expect not to just to return to the old normal, but to be called upon to create and be creative about what will be the new normal. Next, please. Just a couple of observations from Francis and Fratelli Tutti. The church has a public role over and above her charitable and educational activities. She works for the advancement of humanity and of universal fraternity. Fraternity Tutti, universal fraternity. Next, please. And now it's like it's as if we need to rethink our image of the church. And as I think most people understand the church and their experience of church, most people, it occurs like indoors. It occurs together in buildings. And Francis says, no, we need now to think of the church as a home with open doors, because she is a mother. And in imitation of Mary, the mother of Jesus, we want to be a church that serves, that leaves home and goes forth, and it places, and from its places of worship, goes forth from its sacristies in order to accompany life. That particular quote, he doesn't say church as field hospital, but that's a very good definition of the church as field hospital. And this new church, this new vision of church that he's calling us toward, is to go out those doors and go where the people are and be there for them and minister for them. Next, please. Now I don't want to turn to this new book. I hope you found it, and I urge you to find it. It is a marvelous book. Let Us Dream, The Path to a Better Future. It says Pope Francis, and indeed he wrote it, but Austin Ivory, who is possibly the best, the most versed, the best in-depth scholar and of the life and times of Pope Francis, joins him in this book and becomes a kind of a catalyst for him in helping him think about the kinds of things he needs to say. And the way I kind of interpret it is, right, having written Fratelli Tutti, now what? And so now he moves to Let Us Dream, which is what kinds of dreams, what kinds of futures can we dream about if we take seriously the idea of universal fraternity. Next, please. And here's I think this is a really important slide. I hope you can read it. On top, there's the Fratelli Tutti, a little cartoon version of all of us together, men and women, brotherhood, sisterhood. And that's the encyclical. And it leads to this book, Let Us Dream. And so let's see about the transition. Following are 3 quotes from Let Us Dream that circle back to and Fratelli Tutti, and showing the influence of Fratelli Tutti on Let Us Dream, that we really have two sides of the same coin. So first, notice all 3 have fraternity as part of them. Perhaps because we have recovered in lockdown, and he's always in the context of abstract and theological writing, bringing us back to what our experience has been in the COVID lockdown. So because we have recovered in lockdown, a little of that fraternity, our hearts had painfully missed. Many of us have begun to feel an impatient hope that maybe the world could be organized differently to reflect that truth. And then this is the time to restore an ethics of fraternity and solidarity, regenerating the bonds of trust and belonging. And finally, the dream of a different future. We need to choose to dream of a different future. We need to choose fraternity over individualism. Sorry about that. No, stay with that. That was just my daughter trying to reach me. To dream of a different future, we need to choose fraternity over individualism as our organizing principle. I mean, you can put that on a bumper sticker. Fraternity, the sense of belonging to each other and to the whole of humanity, is the capacity to come together and work together against a shared horizon of possibility. Next. In the book, in a postscript, Ivory writes concerning the development of the manuscript. In his response to the pandemic crisis, Francis wasn't simply serving up diagnoses and prescriptions. What concerned him was the process of transformation itself, how historic change happens, and how we resist or embrace that process. And this would be called the dynamic of conversion. For Francis, as we enter a new realm of anything that requires change, he says that the first change that is required is our own conversion. And then we can move on to the conversion of the rest of the world. So that's the dynamic of conversion. Next, please. Further, he says, I suggested a 3-part narrative that could capture the process of conversion. The see, judge, act method. The see, judge, act method has been used often by the Latin American church to respond to change. Francis has reformulated it in different terms, can contemplate, discern, propose, but it was essentially the same approach. Next, please. And just a little bit for further elaborating. First, look at reality. however uncomfortable, above all the truth of the suffering, above all, the truth of the suffering in the margins of society. First, look. Second, discern the different forces at work, distinguishing what builds up from what destroys, what humanizes from what dehumanizes, and thus choose what is of God, rejecting the opposite. Finally, propose fresh thinking and concrete steps that stem from the diagnosis of what ails us and how we might act differently. This is the basic structure of Let Us Dream, divided into 3 times, if you will: to see, to choose, and to act. Next, please. It occurred to Bob and to me that See Judge Act was already in operation in St. Joseph's. And here we have the 7 steps for the kingdom of community of kingdoms. And as you read the totality of this: welcome, reading, abiding, sharing, action, prayer, that comes pretty close to mapping on to See Judge Act. So you're already well down the road for what the Francis is calling for. Next, please. Very briefly, then, to go a little bit further on a time to see. Next, please. Francis says, I think COVID-19 is making this apparent. For those with eyes to see, this is a time for integrity, for exposing the selective morality of ideology, and for embracing the full implications of what it means to be children of God. That is why I think the future we're called on to build has to begin with an integral ecology. Now, this is a direct reference to Laudato Si. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
An integral ecology, an ecology that takes seriously the cultural and ethical deterioration that goes hand in hand with our ecological crisis. The individualism brought on by the technocratic paradigm has its consequences. Next, please. A time to choose. Next, please. Between the first step, which is to come close and allow yourself to be struck by what you see, and the third step, which is to act concretely to heal and repair, there is an essential intermediate stage to discern and choose. A time of trial is always a time of distinguishing the paths of the good that lead to the future from other paths that lead nowhere or backward. With clarity, we can better choose the first. But how do we choose? Next, please. A time to act. Next, please. All this means having common good goals for human development, rather than the false assumption of the infamous trickle-down theory that a growing economy will make us all richer. By focusing on land, lodging, and labor, repeat, land, lodging, and labor. He has chapters in the book on land, lodging, and labor. These concepts have guided his interventions. We're looking for justice in the distribution and use of land, in the availability of meaningful lodging or housing, and finally in the realm of work and labor. This is like almost like a summary of the church's social teaching. So by focusing on land, lodging, and labor, we can regain a healthy relationship with the world and grow by serving others. In this way, we transcend the narrow individualist framework of the liberal paradigm without falling into the trap of populism. Democracy is then invigorated by the concerns and wisdom of the people involved in it. Next, please. And then finally, this is a call for something we desperately need. Politics can once again be an expression of love through service. By making the restoration of our people's dignity the central objective of the post-COVID world, we make everyone's dignity the key to our actions. To guarantee a world where dignity is valued and respected through concrete actions is not just a dream, but a path to better future. Next, please. Robert O'Gorman.
Thanks, Paul, very much. That last slide certainly is one for us to take away, I think, from Fratelli Tutti for us here in the United States. Just a powerful, powerful piece. Good folks, with that recap of Fratelli Tutti, and with the addition of the next piece that the Pope has written along with Austin Irish as a follow-up and sort of a way to live out Fratelli Tutti, we're now going to turn over the program to you all. So our major focus this morning is engaging the case study that we sent out to all of you. It offers an example of what Pope Francis' church reform would look like if he were a parish pastor. In other words, hey, Francis, if you got so much to say about the church, you know, what would you do if you were pastor? Well, as a matter of fact, he was a parish pastor back in 1980 when he started the parish of St. Joseph the Patriarch outside of Buenos Aires. So the first part of this case, and by the way, as you may have noticed in the footnote on what we sent you as the case, this case has been derived from two books that Ivan Ostrich has written about the Pope, and that's where we've drawn it from. The first part of the case describes why he founded the parish and what pastoral practices he initiated. The second part looks at 38 years, the parish 38 years later, where the same practices are as vibrant now as ever and performed by the laity, however. The challenge for us today is to see what principles of parish practice might guide the renewed mission of St. Joseph's here in Libertyville. I want to prompt the discussion, and for those of you that maybe haven't had a chance to read the total case, I'm going to just read a few selections from it so that it's present to us. Next, please, David. In the 1980s, there was a time of hardship in Argentina. Rising prices and unemployment pushed thousands of working class Argentine families into the barrios and into destitution. The parish covered 3 neighborhoods of simple dwellings on unpaved roads that turned to mud in the rain. The church was little more than a shed, but through the efforts of students and parishioners, soon acquired bricks and a roof. Within a couple of years, it was a huge church at the center of a busy pastoral operation, including a kitchen to feed children and 2 schools offering job skill workshops and adult education. Next, please. Each weekend, Father Bergoglio sent the students out to visit homes, to pray, to bless, and to console, to untie the knots that kept people from taking part in life and in the church, to invite children to catechesis, to uncover pockets of suffering and solitude, and to announce the closeness of God. Sounds quite similar to Jesus' mission, doesn't it? While the work of the seminarians was religious, not social work, it did lead into community projects, communal cook-ins, job skill workshops, night classes, and regular neighborhood fiestas. Next, please. Patriarch San Jose embodied Father Bergoglio's vision of a radical apostolate geared to those on the margins of society, the preferential option for the poor. Rather than put up a sign with mass times outside the church and wait for people to come, he sectioned off the area into zones, assigned dozens of Jesuit students to each one, and sent them out through dusty or muddy streets to visit households. He told the students to, quote, get into the barrio and walk it, starting with the young people. The others, he said, would follow in their own time, and to spend time with the elderly and the sick, paying close attention to the needs of the poorest, whether for food, medicine, or blanket. Next, please. During the week in pastoral theology classes, Father Bergoglio, now Professor Bergoglio in the classroom, asked the students to reflect on their experiences. He insisted that they were not going to teach, but to be taught by the pueblo fiel, the people of faith. That's rather important. Telling these seminarians, you know, you're not going out to teach, but you're going out to be taught. The Jesuits' capacity for inserting themselves into the culture they were sent to evangelize was the decisive test of their faith, he said. How difficult it is and how lonely it can feel when I realize I must learn from the people their language, their terms of reference, their values, not as a way of polishing my theology, but as a new way of being that transforms me, he told them. Today, just briefly, San Miguel's transition, the neighborhood's transition from a rural community to that of a suburban bedroom community with high-rise buildings has caused it to lose its village character and has strained its infrastructure. And in some ways, it's kind of sort of like Libertyville. It's a bedroom community. The college eventually closed and the Jesuits moved to another part of Buenos Aires, but this parish still exists today as a decisive experience in forming a people, both for the people of San Jose and those who continue to serve them. It's a working class neighborhood of little brick homes, gardens, streetlights, shops, and football fields, and still many streets unpaved. Some of the people have jobs in factories and warehouses. Most of them work in the informal sector where income is uncertain, and people hover sometimes above or below the poverty line. Next. The parish pastor today is Father Rafael Velasco, a Jesuit, assisted by a woman religious, Sister Gisela. Father Rafael and Sister Gisela used the same method and experiences of Father Bergoglio 40 years ago. They send out people from the parish who form teams, and among them cover 7 barrios of San Miguel each week. Just as the Jesuits did, they go from house to house, sitting and praying with the people and learning about their lives. Next, please. The pastor commented, it's all mixed together, the spiritual and the material, catechesis and life skills. The kingdom of God is both. We announce Jesus and his kingdom. We share and show the meaning of that sharing, and people's horizons change. Next. Next, please. Oh. In a lengthy article in 1980, Father Bergoglio laid out the criteria of apostolic action for Jesuits promoting justice. The action, he wrote, must be rooted in the concrete demands, as well as the culture and values of the pueblo fiel, and so avoid the approach of the enlightened classes, whether liberal, left-wing, or conservative, who are for the people, but never with the people. And it must start from a direct contact with the poor, seeing concrete acts of mercy as acts of justice, and then reflecting on that encounter. So again, the see, judge, and act, is clear there. Okay, let me just say a few things as we move now into our next period. You're going to have a a full 40 minutes in small groups, and David has a little mechanism on Zoom where you're all randomly assigned to groups of about 5 or so, and that'll happen in a second, and you'll get a notice of what group you're in. You have a full 40 minutes without any interruption from any of us to discuss the case in your small group. Let me just suggest, as you start, let someone volunteer as the coordinator to take you through the questions, which are at the bottom of your case and which are here in front of us. And another volunteer to share some keynotes from the discussion with the larger group when we reassemble after these 40 minutes. So let me suggest 3 ways of beginning. First, take just a few moments in your group for brief introductions. Name, perhaps why you joined today's session, and one brief immediate reaction, perhaps a feeling or an emotion. Secondly, move on to questions. Now, don't let them hinder you in being able to make any other comments you want to. These questions we think are essential in order to begin to apply this parish that Francis ran and which is still operating today as a model of church reform. We think these are good questions for you to apply to St. Joseph's here in Libertyville. But again, as we go through them, don't feel like you can't say some other things that you think are important. All right. And then Paul and I and Dave perhaps, and Father John perhaps, we're going to be popping in and out of your sessions, but we're going to be flies on the wall. And we're going to change our videos to pictures. And so we're not going to be able, you won't even see any reactions on our faces. And please don't at all let us interrupt you. We will be muted and we won't be joining in the discussions. So there we go. First of all, the questions. Pope Francis calls us to be missionaries. That's a constant theme that he uses when he talks about what we are as members of the church. We are missionaries. How does what the seminarians did and what the people now are doing in this Argentinian parish fit with what you grew up to understand as the meaning of the word missionary? Secondly, what are the missionary needs in Libertyville? And then thirdly, how do we organize St. Joseph's Parish, both to make contact with people in the community and then to reflect together on God's presence? Okay, those are the questions. At the end, we'll go to this prayer. It's now time to move into the small groups, and David, let you take it from there.
Okay, thank you, Professor. All right, we've resumed coming from our breakout rooms or so. I will turn over the floor to Paul and Bob, because I know they were visiting the groups as well. And I think, gentlemen, you wanted to invite different leaders from each of the groups to share some of their reflections and maybe some of the finer points of what they were discussing from the question, right?
Right, Dave. Excuse me. Thanks very much. Appreciate the. It was just amazing, Father John, to go around to your parishioners. It was quite a gift, I think, for Paul and I to have to see the excuse me, the tremendous enthusiasm and dedication. Let me just take about 15 minutes, if we can, to sort of pull together what we heard and maybe have a more general focus of these three questions. Let me just take a crack at the first one for a couple of minutes. The word missionary. What were some of the key ideas about struggling with that word, its meaning, that came from your group? Please just feel free, anybody who wants to speak from the different groups or for the different groups to just pop in, okay? You're on.
I'll go first.
Okay, go ahead, Janine. Go ahead.
So what our group came with is missionary and is about going out, but usually with a very specific plan. And the conversation was it could be international or into poorer sections, but it came with going out with a plan, and this is what a missionary would do.
Okay, so that somehow the notion of missionary had this idea of there's a purpose, there's a plan to go with. Yeah. Okay, great. I think that, just to relate that, I think as your parish begins to re-examine its mission, that's probably a key part to hold, that we need to have some kind of a plan for the mission. Other responses to the meaning of that word missionary, how may it changed over time for you all?
Yeah, we sort of struggled with the word missionary, kind of thought about historically, maybe the way we grew up. A missionary came from a far off land, someplace we didn't understand, a completely different culture or environment, country, part of the world we weren't familiar with. And it was sort of out there and came to us, Mission Sunday. I think we still have Mission Sunday, but it was a word that it maybe is hard to apply to our local community or our surrounding area, our parish, that, we thought more in terms of evangelization or engagement. I don't know if we really need to get stuck on that word, but I'd say our group was discussing the applicability of it in terms of the way we want to build engagement through our local parish or local community.
Dan, I think that's an important point that you raised. And the reason I say that is because Francis has been very insistent. If you've followed any of his talking about the church, he keeps calling us to be missionaries. And that's a word that he's really putting in our face. And I think the whole idea of examining the deeper mission of that, the deeper meaning of that word is probably quite important. So that's I appreciate your raising that issue. Anybody else on this word missionary?
From my group, we talked about, and I talked about, growing up, I have an uncle and a couple uncles who were missionaries, and then when Benedictine, particularly in Central Latin America, and to me, a missionary always went off to faraway places to help the needy and establish, in my case, my uncle, libraries and educate. And then as they did their work, there was always combative natures coming back to them. Uncle worked with Romero and Unifor before her death. And so I always saw this going off and helping others and trying to bring about change in countries. A little more definitely just from personal experience. But as we talked in a group, comparing it to what they were doing down in Buenos Aires, where what I saw missionaries go off to proclaim, to spread a predetermined word, as opposed to what was going down in Buenos Aires, where it was to go out to listen, and how listening is a lot harder than talking or preparing, and we need to kind of change that mentality to listening more as we go out, as opposed to professing.
John, I think that's extremely important you bring that up, because again, if you looked at this case that we have here back in the 1980s, and Francis is preparing Jesuit seminarians, a lot of whom are going to be, quotes, missionaries, as in the old notion of going to a foreign place. And he right there early on is trying to say, guys, you know, you're not going out to tell people something. You're going out to listen. And he goes even further. He says, you're going to learn your faith when you encounter those people. And it's you're right. It's a very different notion. You know, we think of missionary as going out and proclaiming the gospel. Well, you know, I think Francis is saying missionary is going out and discovering the gospel. So your point is well made. Anybody else want to make it? Please.
Can I say something? Okay. In 1972, I'm Marianne Spear. I worked in the Appalachian Mountains, and one of our things was, don't tell the people what they need. Let them tell you what they need. Let them tell me what they need. We predominantly worked with children. We also worked in the nursing homes. We worked with the elderly. It was through the University of Dayton, but it wasn't official missionary work. So I learned a long time ago, you listen first, then you ask. And as I taught for 35 years, and as a teacher, I can tell you the best teachers are the ones that listen to their children. Learn from your student. Always learn from your student. You might give them a thing or two, but they'll give you more. So
Marianne, Marianne, I really appreciate, because you're speaking from experience, and also you're going back to 72. That's a good deal before 19.
That's how old I am.
Well, and also, but the point I want to get at is, what was that? Did that cause you to have a conversion? In other words, was that a hard thing for you to at least get used to, that you were supposed to be listening rather than giving? Or
I'm a middle child. I'm a middle child in a big family. I listened real well and did what I wanted most of the time.
You were born with that. Terrific.
I was born listening.
All right. Anybody else?
And then you learn to ignore.
Pardon me? Say it again.
I said you listen and you ignore what you don't want.
All right.
Okay, they don't know what I'm doing. I can do a lot.
Okay, so St. Joseph, you got somebody to teach you here if you're hung up on this. Thanks, Marianne. Anybody else on mission?
I think one of the other thoughts that came up in our group, certainly we had the similar feeling that, yeah, being a missionary was something that you went out and did. It was something more global in nature than local. But another concept that we talked about was that you felt like you needed to be formed or instructed or taught before you could go out and be a missionary and did something. And so I think as we think about how do we apply this back to St. Joe's, it's the idea that you just need to get involved. It doesn't necessarily have to be something that takes a lot of time to be formed before you can go and be a missionary, but it's just taking that first step.
Thanks, John. You know, let me just make an observation in terms of popping in on each of the groups. One of the things that I kept hearing in each of the groups that people were talking about was that as you got involved in some of these activities, maybe it was the food pantry, maybe it was working with youth, visiting the nursing homes, or contacting people these days on the phone in the nursing homes. One of the things that really I heard people talk about as they talked about these experiences was how enriching the relationship was for them when they had this outreach. In other words, it seems to me that the heart of missionary, or at least what Francis is trying to tell us about missionary, is somehow having a personal relationship. You know, as Catholics, we're always very big, and rightly so, you know, theologically, into real presence. And I think that's what I kept hearing today in the small groups. You were talking about real presence. And I was really struck by that. Let's move on if we can, just because of our time here. The second question asked about the missionary needs in Libertyville. What were some of the ideas that folks came up with or imagined and began to point to as the quotes missionary needs in Libertyville? Anybody want to start us off on that?
So our group spent a lot of time talking about the needs of the youth. and just how the formation and the education of the youth is kind of a key part and a key building block for, especially I think, a community where we have lots of families. And we were remarking at, some of the good things that are already going on in the parish. The work that the Duttons are doing with the youth group was well lauded and well noted. Hi, Tom and Bridget. But also, like, looking at, okay, how do we make it so that the youth are seeing our actions and trying to, there was some reflection on how where like youth are going and can go, and just how to make sure that they are well catechized to face this world that there are some open hostilities to some of the things that we believe. So,
Matt, I think it's a very important piece. And if you recall, of course, in the case, when Francis, Father Bergoglio, sends these first Jesuits out, he says, start with the youth. That's what he said, start with the youth. And I'm really struck, some other conversations I've had with folks in your parish, that the youth are very central to St. Joseph's in Libertyville, or at least you're trying to make them more central. Paul and I can reflect on our parish here in Nashville, Christ the King, that is not a high priority, unfortunately. We have a great parish. We have a terrific pastor. And we're very proud of our parish. But I do see that as a real lack. And somehow this inability to have the youth as a focus and in a sense, perhaps a leadership in our church, I think is a very important piece, Matt. Appreciate that. Again, back to Libertyville, maybe not so much the parish, but the town, the area. Any other notion of missionary needs that you see out there?
Well, something that I'm not sure it's missionary, I'm not sure where it fits. Something that came up in our group was, and Bill brought it up, is how do you dialogue with people that have such different views than you, especially these last 4 years, and especially through the last week or so we've been through. We did talk about this a lot. I think Marguerite's answer was to work really hard at trying to find something that you had in common. So I don't know where that fits.
Well, I think it fits perfectly, Marianne. In other words, if we're talking about going out to the other, and if we consider Libertyville, perhaps as the other, we unfortunately, I think I'd like to see the Pope write an encyclical on the riots of last week, how this sense of otherness is so striking, and I think you're right. I think that it's somehow this ability to have dialogue. It's a really interesting piece I was reading lately on the difference between dialogue and let me have it here. It's the difference between dialogue and debate, and it's a powerful 15 or 12 point piece that really compares the two. And as I was reading that, I was saying, oh my gosh, so often I'm on the side of debate and not dialogue. Anyway, yeah, right you are. That in order to make that connection, somehow we've got to be able to have a sense of connection and dialogue. Anybody else on the missionary needs in Libertyville?
We tied it into, again, to that listening of people and not presuming what is needed, but to listen for what is needed, and to gather
Right.
sharing of stories. Dan Harris, sharing of stories in our group, and looking at our surrounding communities as well, but to listen and then see what is needed.
Yeah. Again, go back to the dynamic that Francis talks about. See, judge, and act. And it starts not with a judgment. It starts with seeing what's there. listening, as you said. Okay,
Bob, before you move on, I've just one that really struck me that I feel I need to share. I was at doing a committal service at Lakeside Cemetery, and I was talking to Preston Dane and one of the gentlemen that used to work with him. And sadly, the funeral was for somebody who had overdosed. And I said, "Isn't this a shame, such a young person?" And he looked at me and he said, "You see over there?" He pointed to a grave marker, overdose. Another one, overdose. Another one, overdose. He went about 5 or 6 in that just small area of young people who, and he says it's probably 99% of people who died young is probably from overdose. So that really struck me about, even in that small cemetery, how there was probably half a dozen young people who had died from overdose in Libertyville. So that's something that is missionary, that needs to be addressed. What is causing so much, what did the desire, there's a deep longing in people that is causing them to go into addiction. And I think that's something that needs to be evangelized. Whatever is causing that needs to be evangelized. I don't know what it is, but it is something that needs to be evangelized, and that's definitely missionary territory.
Profound, Father John. It just occurs to me as you give that example. You weren't expecting that, you said, and the realization that each of us in this parish are out in Libertyville. We're out in Chicago.
And Bob, when you see the picture board, people put picture boards together when somebody dies. You could say it's a perfect family.
Yeah.
They have holiday homes, they go on vacation, they go to Disney World, they do everything that every other family does. And there's no seeming kind of like trauma. But it's definitely something I think that needs to be evangelized in some way.
Yeah, that's often hidden. And it takes a sharp eye to be able to see what's really underneath that. Hey, let's just, we should be wrapping up here. So maybe just a couple of comments on the last question. Some comments about how do we organize both to make contact and reflect. And I think that was the important piece in this parish down in Latin America. They divided up the parish. They sent people out. So there was a way of organizing to make contact, but they came back and reflected, and it was fascinating, particularly as you read the second part of the case, where these people who were out were making their observations and how they met with father and sister, and they began to really share what they saw. So I think that reflecting piece is very important. Anything that came to mind that would be valuable to share with the group with regard to this third question?
So in our group, we talked about 3 points. One is the success when we did the calling. We've done that a couple times as a parish, but that again is calling people and listening. We also talked about really making either making a prayer team more accessible. We have people in the parish that pray, but it's not really understood. How can individuals get their prayers to a prayer team? And then we just talked about maybe going back and doing focus groups, and it'd be really easy to do them on Zoom, have a couple questions, invite individuals, and back to what John Hay said, you don't need to be trained, informed. It's just about being a leader and having them.
I think one of the things I'd like to say too is our group kind of came up with the idea that we have a tremendous opportunity right now because people need to get with other people, and you can have all kinds of Zoom type meetings. I've been doing more and more of it lately. Just have a bunch of friends or other people and just have a little cocktail hour, discuss, meet them, just listen to them. People really need it. We were really, very concerned about the mental health aspects of this whole pandemic and how people are so stressed. So I think, on a one-to-one basis, just get out there, organize, talk. Zoom was so easy if you've got a computer with a video, that just get into the community, just like we did somewhat with the parishioners, getting in touch with them.
All right. Okay. Any other quick last comment? We'll take one more if there is.
This is David. Like our group, we talked again. It's all about personal invitation, really. Listening to their stories, being less program oriented and going back to some more grassroots efforts, the outreach, meeting people where they're at. And then really one of the comments that someone said in our group that really stuck with us again is making the walls of the church more transparent and, continue to bring the church outside the church. And, one of the examples we had was the drive-in mass. Yeah, I mean, it was very, very, very good question.
All right, let's move on to the next piece. Before we do, Paul, was there any particular comment that you wanted to make and observations that you had?
Yeah, that was with Father Trout a couple of weeks ago. I was talking about the number of the terminology I used was the number of churched to unchurched Catholics there were in Libertyville, and he was saying that there are quite a few unchurched. And then this morning, as things started, is it the Eigners? You were talking about the going at it through the economic data, and finding that there are a lot of people, probably a lot more people who go to church than don't go to church. Isn't the unchurched, the unpaying, whatever you want to call them, population an immediate, I want to say targeted, no, it always sounds like war, an immediate concern for a church? In other words, that let missionary activity start at home. At home is the parish. Lots of folks in the parish who could be evangelized and so on and so on. So that was one. The other thing was that I was struck by the number of people who acknowledged that this dialogue business is not necessarily an easy thing to do. In fact, maybe it's more often harder to do than easier to do, because and I just keep thinking about, I've never been involved in politics, but I'm very interested in politics, and it just gives me a headache to think about how you could bring the factions together in the United States. This is something Biden said he was going to try to do. How do you do it? This is unbelievably difficult. Right. Well, the kinds of dialogues we want to have is not with people who are totally our kind of people. You want to talk with people often who will disagree with you, and the disagreements may end up being extremely emotional and so on. And how we deal with that, the walls that seem to appear between people is something I think that Francis's understanding of the church of the future, this is one of the big issues that needs to be on the agenda.
Paul, you brought us back right to where you began. Most of us, I think,
I'm always running around in circles,
most of us, when we begin, when we talk about unity, we have an image that Francis rejects. We have an image of a sphere, sort of a basketball, if you like, where everything is the same. We're all together. And Francis says, no. He specifically in his talks rejects the image of sphere. He says polyhedron. And if you see that thing, you know, it's got all different shapes and sizes. People are together. Okay, that's the key, but it's accepting all kinds of differences. And that's hard. I think I want a sphere. I want everybody to be on the same page. I want everybody to be, thanks. Well, John, it's over to you to unmute yourself and take it away for our conclusion.
Okay, I want to express my deepest gratitude to our presenters, to Dave Retzek for facilitating and organizing this session, and to all of you who took part in it. You have given us a lot of information to reflect on, and the PPC, the staff, and the clergy will reflect on this and see what we can learn from this morning's reflection and from how we can respond to Pope Francis's call to make the church more missionary, because you know there's an awful lot of people out there who have left the church, and we can't continue with business as usual, or we're just going to fail. So we're over time, so let's conclude with the closing prayer, and I'll recite it, and then we can just finish up. But once again, thank you to Bob and Paul for this tremendous presentation. Let us pray. O God, Trinity of love, from the profound communion of your divine life, pour out upon us a torrent of fraternal love. Grant us the love reflected in the actions of Jesus, in his family of Nazareth, and in the early Christian community. Grant that we Christians may live the gospel, discovering Christ in each human being, recognizing him crucified in the suffering of the abandoned and the forgotten of our world, and risen in each brother or sister who makes a new start. Come, Holy Spirit, show us your beauty reflected in all the peoples of the earth, so that we may discover anew that all are important and all are necessary, different faces of the one humanity that God so loves the world. Amen. So David,
Amen.
back to you.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for everybody for participating. This concludes our presentation for today. As I mentioned, we are recording this, so we will have a link available for you to review, to reflect if you'd like to see it again. Thank you again, and have a blessed weekend.